I'm Atiq and Ahmed. I work in Asian Disaster Preparedness Center. Asian Disaster Preparedness Center is based in Bangkok, but works in 26 Asian countries, Asian Pacific countries, where we provide different kind of, technical support, as well as collaboration with the government and the civil society organizations as well, where we bring different kind of tools. I was hearing the previous presentation very carefully with my limited language understanding, and I understood that quite a lot of efforts are going on primarily towards finding different kind of tools and mechanisms, basically leading towards the strategy and developing the strategy itself as well. And that kind of process requires understanding quite a lot of contents, and the contents depends on the context as well. And the context, provides quite a lot of, ingredient for strategic development of these things. So I would like to present some of the works from this partnership on environment and disaster risk reduction. This particular PEDRR, in short, this is a combined partnership. I will discuss a little bit more on that. But gradually moving towards a new type of content, that links different, dimensions, different domains, and basically suggest capacity building. So this is just one example. We'd like to share with you what we were doing and what is shaping up. And this particular presentation, I hope to provide you a linkage with the initiatives that are shaping up, as well as some of the capacity building initiatives that we are shaping up, and we have developed guidance towards that. So what is PEDRR? The Partnership for Environment and Disaster Risk Reduction. This is the full name. But it talks about primarily, quite a lot of issues. I'll come to the issues. But at the beginning, when we started, that was in 2008 actually, the 2008, many of you know that UNISDR, which is the UN Office of Disaster Risk Reduction, provides a lot of guidance towards, what will be the disaster risk reduction strategy of the country, or even globally, or even regionally. Thailand has hosted one of the Asian Ministerial Conference. The Asian Ministerial Conference contributed quite a lot of understanding how disaster risk reduction could be done in a more proactive manner. So that understanding, how we link up with more sustainable development, how we link up with, environmental management and all these things requires much more, understanding of the linkage, how this can be shaped up in the specific context. For example, a coastal context. In 2004, the great tsunami, the Sumatra tsunami we have seen. And we have seen in the Indian Ocean, there are many countries suffered. Thailand is one of them. But Thailand is also one of them who has actually recovered faster than others. So this is a success story. But what actually enabled to build back better or come to the normal situation is a learning. So these kind of learnings we'd like to tap. We'd like to tap how we can integrate these into the future developments and future risk management as well. So this particular partnership is actually a thematic group that emerged from UNISDR's different type of thematic groups. This is particularly focused on, ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction, and to ensure it's mainstreamed and development planning at global, national, and local levels. So the developments, when we are talking about sustainable developments. But sustainability depends on your success of how you manage the risk as well. So this disaster risk reduction for shorter range, but also the longer range, which is a more climate change adaptation, how we shape up, requires quite a lot of interaction among these groups. We have seen, you have one conference of parties, UNFCCC conference, you have seen 10,000 people attending. Then after 2 weeks, you see another conference where another 10,000 people attending. But these 10,000 and 10,000 people hardly have an interaction. In that, this particular partnership also brings kind of science into it, a science of environmental management, ecosystem management, and also the science that emerge, science and management both emerge from the risk reduction domain, and also the processes that we are adapting for climate change adaptation for longer future. So those kind of learnings. So it's in the objective of the PEDRR. So these are the generic part. The partnership has actually started with a lot of collaboration, as we mentioned. This is a partnership. So partnership of quite a lot of institutions. ADPC is one of them. But in general, most of us are part of it. There are a core group of it, but the partnership is growing, and you are also part of it. And you can share things from your own context. And the learning could be from other situations as well. Disasters due to natural hazards, such as tropical cyclone, floods, droughts, and so forth, can have adverse environmental consequences. And we have seen that, in recent time in Myanmar, the cyclone Nargis. We have seen the typhoon Haiyan in Philippines, and the floods, the Pakistan flood, huge flood in 2010-11. The Thailand flood, it is a unique consequence that, a medium-sized flood comparing to the global other floods can create a mega disaster. This was unprecedented, And because of these understandings, we need to, link better these understandings from different contexts as well. So natural hazards are also being aggravated due to climate change. The climate change is impacting in a much more higher way because of the vulnerabilities we have and because of the development constraints as well. I will talk a little bit about that later on. But gradually, these natural hazards we need to understand better as well. We also need to understand the degraded environmental consequences. The environmental degradation happens due to different reasons. Even in some cases, we do development with a very proactive, thinking that we want to develop, and we are innocently develop things. And then we even see that sometimes, because of our lack of understanding of the other domains, this is not contributing positively in longer term. For example, we have seen development of dams, sluice gates, and many coastal infrastructures as well. If we do not factor those scientific understanding for the future scenarios, often this can create havoc as well. And Thailand is a deltic country, and the delta has a lot of issues: sea level rise, sedimentation, subsidence. You have upland rainfall, the basin management, all these things. And you have seen last year the phenomena of El Nino, which has impact on the same place where you had flood, you may see drought. So those kind of dilemma can also create quite a lot of adverse situation, and environmental degradation may happen. So the understanding also needs to develop from creating better environment, healthy environment, and healthy ecosystems in general. And we may think of forest management, mangroves, wetlands, coral reefs, and many other things that we are thinking now can fit into it. And the natural buffers and protective environment can create an interface for your longer subsistence economy, but at the same time can create an interface for disaster risk reduction. So those kind of complementary arrangements, we can look into it. At the same time, the fully functional ecosystem build local resilience against disasters. And probably in some of the IUCN presentations, you will also see that how these things under EPIC program and other programs are shaping up. And actually, the community-based things are providing multiple, good outcomes as well. So those kind of things. But in a nutshell, this intersection between environment, livelihoods, and the disaster is an issue which requires integrated thinking and sharing our exchange, learnings. What we learn from ecosystem, what we learn from livelihood, adaptation, but at the same time, the disaster management that we see on a regular basis. So this interface that I'm talking about would lead towards sustainability. So when we talk about, in the previous presentation, we have seen a lot of discussion on finding mechanisms for sustainable development. Yes, the SDG is giving us quite a lot of these targets, 169 targets, 17 goals. But this is, in other sense, this is giving an manuals as well. But this is also an encyclopedia kind of thing. 169 development, what do we do with that in my own project? So those kind of issues require actually a systematic understanding of the domains. So the ecosystem management, the lessons that come up from the last 10 years, the lessons that come up from the disaster risk reduction since the Thailand flood and the drought, we can synergize those. And sometimes those lessons are very important to think differently. And the climate change adaptation, it's a long haul itself. It's a long generation. We have a commitment to our next generation. And how we, build that commitment, and basically how we bring science into it to better understand future. Those kind of things requires more coherent understanding. And that we find that this ecosystem-based DRR can provide some tools of linking these things in a more operational way, which is, not necessarily an encyclopedia like, SDG, but contributing towards that. Another thing I'd like to discuss a bit is this particular framework, which is a conceptual framework of special report on extreme event. This is IPCC climate change domain, Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change. You know that the negotiations are going on. The Kyoto Protocol was not fully ratified, but basically the Paris Agreement happened. But basically, this is the first time in 2012 when the disaster professionals or risk management professionals and the climate professionals started to think together. Why? They found that the extreme events that are happening, for example, Typhoon Haiyan or even Thai flood, these extreme events are happening in an intersection between climate and disaster and development. So one conceptual model, we see this disaster risk. But the disaster risk is shaped by weather and climate events. And this weather and climate events is basically shaped up by the climate change in general, which is the regular natural variability, but also anthropogenic climate change that we do, emissions and all so forth. So this is creating a penetration towards the climate change, this intersection. But this change is actually in our hand. There is a very well-established understanding that if you do the natural forcing and apply only the natural forcing, which is the solar radiation and all these things, then the climate change would not happen fast. But once you add our emissions into it, the CO2 and other greenhouse gas emissions, that is faster. Meaning that if we can control anthropogenic climate change, then we can control this impact as well. So the development actually provides that contribution, this greenhouse gas emissions. So how much we want to develop, that is our desire, and that contributes more and more contribution towards the greenhouse gases. So this creates a situation for disasters as well. And the disasters actually happen in the intersection between vulnerability, exposure, meaning more population growing, we are heading towards more vulnerable areas, establishing our settlements over there, those kind of things. And when these things come together, the disaster risk goes higher. So we can control our development, we can control our climate change if we have a proper strategy to that. So in that case, we can also manage better or even define our disaster risk in many senses. So this is another way of thinking, but this is also a thinking that allows you to think in the intersections. An ecosystem-based DRR and more sustainable resilient frameworks can actually lead towards that. So with this background understanding, this PEDRR actually started to think quite a lot of capacity building initiatives and capacity building, guidance and training programs. So initially, I would like to just show you some capacity building programs as a taste of it. but also, the content, if you're interested, you can look further. And I'll be open to discuss that later on as well. So some of the things that is contributing towards PEDRR partnerships is basically, at an initial level, we came up with some training content. And in that, the training content was more towards ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction for sustainable development. We should remind that at that time, the SDGs were not there. But these intersections and lessons started to emerge quite a bit, because MDGs have started to have good, contributions. At the same time, from the ecosystem-based adaptation and disaster risk reduction with a more environment-friendly flavor started to bring quite a lot of content. So as early as, in 2011, we carried out a couple of trainings, the national trainings, which is the Thailand training here, because Thailand had lots of lessons from tsunami. At the same time, you have a lot of programs on environmental and ecosystem-based adaptation. And later on in India as well, we conducted another for South Asia. So these initiatives actually started to give this content on intersection, what DRR content could be useful for, the environmental management, what are the emerging ecosystem-based adaptation, connotations which can be linked up with that, and what are the common grounds, those kind of things. So these are some of the contents we have. If you want later, we can have a more look on that. But from that, basically, the PEDRR, along with another network, CNRD network, which is, a network of academia and, more institutions who are working specialized on this particular issue, have come up with two different type of capacity building program. The first one is basically a graduate level teaching module, disaster environment and risk reduction on ECO-DRR. So this was a limited content, and the content had, also a wonderful case study, which is very important for this ecosystem-based DRR. As I was mentioning, the lessons and learning from others are very important. So the case studies and exercise books are online, and this was one of the collaborative initiative that came up from that. So things like, a limited module is the elements of disaster risk reduction, around 15 hours, and then ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction initiatives, plus ECO-DRR instruments and approaches. This is very critical, how that shaped up. And the institutions and, the learnings from the projects, organizations like IUC and WWF and UNEP have contributed significantly into it and provided wonderful lessons that they have harnessed over the time, and those lessons are fed into it. Then also, this ECO-DRR instrument and approaches lead towards mainstreaming environment. So not only the tools, but another major thing is, once you have these tools, how you integrate into the governmental system or governance system. So these governance systems, they have their own processes, as we have seen in the morning presentation, but how we can link up those kind of exercises are there as well. So this is another initiative by PEDRR and CNRD. At the same time, under PEDRR, we also started to think about more context-specific one, as I mentioned earlier. So content, but content would relate to the context. The context for coastal would be significantly different from the dryland areas or landlocked areas. So the content that you require for the mangrove areas or the coastal areas of Thailand, Indonesia, Maldives could be quite different from Mongolia or Nepal. So those kind of things we started to think about. And then in this particular first initiative, a regional training manual was developed for the coastal areas. And it was quite detailed and thorough with hands-on exercises and so forth, which I feel you should look at whenever you are planning something for coastal areas. And this is for managers actually. The coastal zone managers can find quite a lot of tools that was applied, which some tools worked very well, some tools didn't work very well. but you can make comparisons on that as well. And you can see that how these would provide ingredients for your strategies. In the left side, you see the disaster indicators, disaster recovery, emergency response, warning, this kind of thing. But then other side is more long-term, no? Society, economy, coastal resource management, land use. But the intersecting point are actually, the first one is the governance. Once you govern, you can actually bring elements from each other. This is short-term, this is long-term. So this initiative actually asked a very good question, and we asked, how resilient is your coastal community? So you can actually assess these situations, and we have done these things with most of the Indian Ocean countries, and this was adopted. There are good training programs that are also available in that. You can have a look. More recently, we have also come up with a few other course books, particularly for ecosystem resilience in a changing climate, taking a little bit of resilience approach, but bringing mainstreaming approaches into it, how you can actually mainstream things from ecosystem angle, and how you can bring these things into the development. And we have a couple of manuals as well, the facilitators manual and other things. And this initiative we have piloted in Sri Lanka and Vietnam, and the piloting initiative was quite successful, and the result was also risk awarded later on by quite respectable authorities. More recently, we have come up with, this is very fresh from the oven actually, last 2 weeks work. Basically, from APN, ADPC, and national centers, we came up with this agro ecosystem resilience in a changing climate. So we talked about agro ecosystem, but agro ecosystem would be affected due to climate change quite a bit, and disaster risk reduction actions can contribute towards that as well. And then a combined understanding how you can unfold, there are good course materials for this as well. All these that I have discussed have training programs linked with that. So you can also think of bringing that. There are a host of EBA initiatives that there. IUCN is a champion of that. WWF has worked quite a lot of that. So you can have I didn't bring the IUCN presentation because Dr. Angshu is presenting after me, so you will have a lot of flavor from that. So what I would suggest that, this ecosystem-based frameworks and how you can link with the mainstreaming approach requires a systematic process. In here, there are some systematic processes, how you can link up these frameworks. This is another domain of work which can bring on. And host of other good publications and resource materials are available. Please have a look on the PEDRR website, and you will find that quite often, the latest ones that came up from this organization, that organization, you can look at. And it's a growing wealth of things, more good understandings are there. To end this quick presentation is basically, we are living in a post-2015 domain where there are global frameworks envisioned that we would integrate, and they framed up. This is two years back. We are now 2017. I would say we are still hunting a bit to do how, which is still, 2 years back I was even more hopeful. Now I'm looking at really targeted examples, good examples. This one has a potential or not. This one is not good. Those kind of screening approach. So this integration of SFDR, Paris Agreement, the Sendai Framework, or SDGs requires in the intersection of good examples. Thailand has quite a lot of good examples. Thailand has quite a lot of bad examples, like any other country. These are tryouts. So those good examples, if we can bring and test it, screen it for better future, that in 2030, 2050, and end of the century, if that works well, those kind of robust system we can test now. And this intersection requires partnerships, requires understanding. PEDRR is one of the contributions into it. There are many others as well. And thank you very much, everyone, for patience hearing. Thank you.